The UK government's currently consulting on banning so-called conversion therapy. And I wondered what your view was as a therapist on that in relation to talking therapy in particular.
Well, the first thing I would say about that is that as soon as it's termed conversion therapy, the argument's already over, right? Because this is one of the things, conservative politicians are particularly bad at this, by the way. That's why I mentioned at the beginning that you should never discuss viewpoint diversity. I mean, you think about what you're doing when you discuss viewpoint diversity. You think, you're conservative, let's say, that you've just pulled a fast one on the lefties. It's like you're so gung-ho about diversity. What about viewpoint diversity? And you don't even notice that you just subordinated the highest value in the hierarchy of values to diversity. You lose, buddy. It doesn't matter what argument you make after you've done that. It's like, I define the terms of the debate. I established the questions. You seeded the terminological ground. You can flap your lips all night, but you're not going to change that. And so the conversion therapy issue right there is the way, as soon as that's framed in that manner, it's a lost cause. Like I had a client, a young man, who was being pressured quite intensely into a homosexual relationship by someone who was attracted to him. And he was genuinely confused about his sexuality and certainly about how to respond. Well, I wasn't going to do conversion therapy. I mean, I don't know what's up with this kid. I have no idea. And neither did he. And so the goal there is if someone comes to you who's confused about their sexuality, and like, have you met someone who isn't confused about their sexuality? It's really complicated, especially when you're 16, Well, you listen and you try to sort them out. And if you have any sense, you realize that you have enough trouble with your own destiny to not bother imposing your viewpoint, moral or otherwise, on this teenager. You want to help them come to their own conclusions. And it's an axiom of clinical practice that only those formulations that come from the client themselves will result in anything approximating lasting behavioral change. So, you could come to me and I could give you advice, and you might even think it was good advice, but you're not going to take it because you can't even give yourself advice and take it. How are you going to take it from a relative stranger? But if you go through the process of thinking it through, like really deeply thinking it through, and you draw your own conclusions, and then maybe you practice their implementation, there is some possibility of change. And you just can't do that by, like conversion therapy. So, and it's partly because there is enough temperamental variability in people that you don't know what the right answer is for the person who comes to see you, no more than you know what the right answer is for your children or for your mate. And hopefully what you do is, in this process of dialogical relationship and mutual revelation, the person's pathway becomes clearer. And I do believe that the goodwill exchange of thought does, in fact, constitutes that process. So, as soon as it's conversion therapy, the game's already lost. But there's a fair bit of fluidity in human sexuality. And people have to come to terms with that. You might say, as a rule of thumb, and I think this is true, your life is going to be a lot simpler if you adopt something approximating traditional sexual roles. And so you step outside of that confine at your peril. But it might also be your necessity. Who's to say? So, and you help the person, in humility, you help the person discover that for themselves. And so I think the talk of conversion therapy, if someone's saying, well, I'll cure you of your homosexuality, it's like, well, it's not a disease, first of all, and so it doesn't need a cure, and probably you can't do that anyways, and it's not the proper way to advertise clinical services, let's say, because that isn't really how a clinical relationship works. So the argument, in some sense, is beside the point as far as I'm concerned.